All right, welcome to your very own deep dive. This time, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at a pilot script for a fictional police drama. It's called On Call. And our deep dive is going to be all about dissecting this world and what it shows us about law enforcement, creative storytelling, and maybe even ourselves.
Yeah, it's a really cool chance to look at how a made-up story tackles these big themes.
Exactly. It's like stepping into this alternate reality, but one that's still rooted in, the real world of police work.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's meet the main characters. We've got Officer Diaz, the rookie, fresh out of the academy. He's ready to hit the streets.
And he's paired up with Officer Harmon, who's a seasoned field training officer. And what's really interesting is that she's carrying this weight, this baggage from a past tragedy, the shooting death of her previous trainee, Officer Delgado.
Oh, wow. Talk about starting with a heavy dose of reality.
Yeah.
Delgado's death was at the hands of Maniac, a gang member. And this Maniac guy, he's still out there with his accomplice.
Yeah, and the script even throws in a possible human trafficking victim who was with them at the time.
Wow. So, a lot to unpack right from the start.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The writers are setting the stage for a story that's not shying away from the darker side of police work and the city itself.
And they don't waste any time throwing Diaz and Harmon right into the action.
Oh, they don't.
Their first call. A domestic violence situation with a drug-addicted son who's assaulting his mother.
Intense.
I was really struck by how the script portrays Harmon's frustration with the mother's behavior, how she enables her son.
Yeah, it definitely touches on those real-world complexities that officers face in domestic situations. You've got the immediate need to de-escalate the violence, but there's also that underlying issue that's often so deep and difficult to address,
Absolutely. And Diaz, the rookie, he tries to connect with the son on a more personal level. But you can tell he's still finding his footing, in these kinds of volatile situations.
Yeah, he makes a classic rookie mistake. He even forgets to turn off his body camera at one point.
Oh, yikes.
Which, the script uses to subtly highlight the intense scrutiny that officers are under these days. Every action, every word, potentially recorded, potentially analyzed. It's a layer of pressure that wasn't really there in those older police dramas.
Totally. And then we have a traffic stop that I think reveals a lot about Diaz and Harmon's policing styles. Diaz is all ready to jump in, but Harmon takes a more nuanced approach. She chooses de-escalation and even tries to guide and support the young man they pull over.
It really speaks to the idea of police discretion, that power that officers have to make those judgment calls in the field. And Harmon chooses to see the potential for rehabilitation, rather than immediately resorting to punishment, which is interesting considering her frustration with the mother in that earlier domestic violence call.
Yeah, very interesting contrast. And then, oh boy, the script throws in a high-speed chase.
You gotta have that classic police drama element, right?
Of course. But what's interesting is how the chase becomes this test of Diaz's impulsiveness versus Harmon's experience.
Totally. Diaz gets so caught up in the adrenaline rush, he disobeys orders, and he nearly pays the price for it. A classic rookie mistake.
And it really highlights the inherent risks in those kinds of pursuits.
Yeah, it does. And it really underscores that tension that exists between following protocol and reacting instinctively,
Right.
in those high-pressure situations. The writers are really using action to show the psychological side of police work.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's really clever. Throughout all of this, though, it's the dynamic between Diaz and Harmon that I find the most fascinating to watch. There are different approaches to policing, their personalities. There's bound to be some friction there.
Yeah, you can see it brewing already, right? It's that classic mentor-mentee relationship, but it's got that extra layer of weight from Harmon's past trauma and the responsibility she feels for Diaz's safety. It's not just about showing him the ropes, it's about protecting him.
Yeah, from suffering the same fate as Delgado. Which brings us to, I think, the heart of what this episode seems to be exploring: mentorship in morality. How does Harmon balance her duty to train Diaz with her desire to shield him from this harsh reality of the job?
It's a question that goes way beyond this fictional world, It speaks to the challenges of guiding someone through a really difficult profession while recognizing the emotional and ethical burdens that come with it.
Absolutely. And speaking of ethical burdens, we see that play out when Diaz confronts Harmon about a threat she made during that domestic violence call.
Ooh, good point. It reveals how her past experiences are starting to color her judgment, and it raises questions about how officers cope with the trauma they face on the job.
So, to sum it up, we've got a rookie who's eager to prove himself, a veteran who's grappling with her past, and a city that's full of crime, danger, and all these complex social issues. And that's all within the first act.
Yeah. And they're already hinting at these big themes: mentorship, morality, and the human cost of policing. We're getting a glimpse into a world that's both familiar and kind of unsettling, a world that's made for entertainment but reflects real-world problems.
I'm hooked. Stay tuned as we keep going with our deep dive into On Call. We'll unpack the layers of meaning in this fictional world and see what we can learn from it.
I can't wait.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, it feels like the writers are really turning up the heat in this next part of the pilot. It's not just the car chase, but the way they bring in that robbery call.
Yeah.
Creates this sense of relentless pressure on Diaz and Harmon.
It's a really smart way to keep the tension high and show how quickly things can change for police officers.
Yeah, 1 minute they're dealing with a traffic stop, and the next they're responding to a potential armed robbery.
Exactly.
And this is where we see Diaz really put to the test. The chase leads to a confrontation, and he ends up firing his weapon for the first time. It's a big moment in the script. What do you think about how it's handled?
Yeah. They don't shy away from the emotional and psychological impact of taking a life, even in the line of duty. Diaz is definitely shaken, and we see him struggle with that decision. It's like a stark reminder that even in this fictional world, the consequences of police work, they can be very real.
Yeah, what I noticed is how Harmon, despite everything she's dealing with, steps in right away to support Diaz. She knows he needs guidance, but she's also wrestling with her own demons from Delgado's death.
It really highlights the complex dynamic of their relationship.
Yeah.
There's that shared trauma,
Yeah.
a bond forged in these intense experiences. They're both navigating the aftermath of violence, each in their own way.
That's a great point. And that tension between their different approaches to policing, it keeps simmering.
Oh, yeah.
Harmon emphasizes protocol and strategy, while Diaz is driven by that rookie idealism, that desire to make a difference, even if it means bending the rules.
It's like the writers are using this clash to explore the generational divide we see in law enforcement sometimes. You've got the veterans who have seen the limitations of the system, and the rookies who still believe they can change it.
It definitely adds depth and complexity to the story. And speaking of complexity, the script doesn't shy away from showing those social issues that contribute to the crimes Diaz and Harmon are responding to. Poverty, addiction, violence.
Yeah.
It's all woven into the story.
It's not just a police procedural. It's like a commentary on the bigger problems that create these environments where crime happens. The writers are asking the audience to think beyond the immediate action and look at the root causes of these challenges.
There's a scene where Harmon takes Diaz to her monastery. It's this quiet place where she goes to find peace and escape the pressure of the job. It's a brief scene, but it gives us a glimpse into how this work impacts her mental and emotional well-being.
It shows the need for self-care. Finding those healthy coping mechanisms in a job that's so stressful and traumatic. And it humanizes Harmon. It shows us that even the most seasoned officer is vulnerable to the weight of their experiences.
And then, just when we think they might get a moment to breathe, the radio comes alive with another call: a robbery in progress. It's like this constant reminder that for cops, there's no downtime. Always on alert, always ready for the next crisis.
Exactly. It shows that the work is never done. The danger is always there. It creates this sense of urgency and unpredictability, keeps the audience on edge.
But amidst all the action and suspense, there are these small moments of reflection that show the character's humanity. Like when Harmon convinces that young man with the meth pipe to call his father.
It's subtle, but it's significant. It shows that even in the middle of all the chaos, there's room for compassion, understanding, helping someone find a path toward redemption. Those moments are what keep the story from becoming completely dark.
Yeah, and in a way, those moments make the darker parts of the story even more powerful.
Yeah.
We see that contrast between the potential for good and the harsh realities.
Absolutely. The script isn't offering simple answers or easy solutions.
No, it's not.
It presents this nuanced and sometimes unsettling picture of police work, and it acknowledges both the heroism and the challenges, the triumphs and the failures.
It's not just about catching bad guys. It's about understanding human nature and the systems that lead to crime and the moral dilemmas that officers have to deal with every day.
And as viewers, we're right there with them, wrestling with those complexities and confronting our own assumptions about law enforcement and the tough questions the script raises.
I'm really curious to see how they handle Diaz's first shooting as the story goes on. You think he'll be able to come to terms with his actions?
That's a great question.
And how will Harmon guide him through the emotional fallout?
It's definitely something that stays with you as we move into the final act. The writers have set the stage for a deep exploration of the human cost of policing, and I'm really interested to see how they bring all these pieces together at the end.
Me too. I feel like we're just scratching the surface of this script. Let's continue our deep dive into On Call and break down that final act. All right, so we're in the final act of On Call, and I can already feel the tension building. Diaz is struggling after that shooting. Harmon's got her own demons, and it feels like the whole city's on edge.
Yeah, the writers have done such a great job weaving those individual struggles together with the bigger themes like justice, morality, and responsibility.
Right.
And in this last act, it all starts to come together.
Exactly. We see Diaz really wrestling with what happened. He fired his weapon, stopped a crime, but, at what cost?
Right.
The script shows his internal conflict, how he wonders if he could have done things differently.
That's so important because it shows that even when officers follow the rules, even when they're justified, there's still this huge emotional and psychological impact. They're not showing Diaz as a hero or a villain, just a human being in this impossible situation.
And Harmon, she's there with him, offering support, but she's fighting her own battles too. It's almost like their roles are reversed from the beginning.
Absolutely. We see how vulnerable Harmon is in this part, haunted by Delgado's death and kind of projecting her fears onto Diaz. It adds a whole other layer to their relationship and makes you think about how officers cope with trauma and loss.
What I found really interesting is how the script uses their personal struggles to reflect a bigger conversation about policing in society.
Oh, yeah.
Diaz's conflict mirrors the pressure officers face.
Yeah.
The scrutiny, the second guessing, having to make split-second decisions and then justify them.
It's a brilliant way to connect those individual experiences with the larger context. It's not just a story about two cops. It's about the whole system of law enforcement in a society dealing with race, power, and accountability.
And they do it in a way that feels so real and makes you think. They're not giving easy answers, just presenting this nuanced and often messy picture of what police and communities face.
That's what makes it so compelling. It makes you think critically, challenge your own assumptions, and see the humanity in everyone involved. It's not just entertainment, it sparks a conversation.
And there's this powerful scene where Diaz confronts Harmon about her past, the choices she's made. It's raw, emotional, and it really exposes the tension between how they see the world.
That scene is key. It shows that generational divide in law enforcement, Diaz is like this new wave of officers, more aware of social justice, wanting transparency and accountability.
And Harmon represents the old guard, where things were done differently, more focused on keeping order, even if it meant bending the rules sometimes.
It's at the heart of the whole mentorship and morality theme. Can Harmon, with all her experience and baggage, really guide Diaz in this new world of policing?
And can Diaz, with his idealism and his desire for justice, actually function in a system that's slow to change? Those are the questions we're left with as the episode wraps up.
The writers have given us so much to think about: action, suspense, emotional depth, and all these big questions about the role of police in society.
It's amazing how they created these characters that feel so real, so human, even in a fictional world.
Exactly. By focusing on that human element, they've taken it beyond just a TV show. They've shown us this world, both familiar and unsettling, that makes us confront our own ideas about justice, morality, and the human cost of policing.
So what do we take away from On Call? It's not just those chases and confrontations, it's those quiet moments, those glimpses of vulnerability. It's realizing that even in the darkest places, there's still hope.
And it's knowing that the conversation about policing, justice, and the role of law enforcement will keep going. It needs empathy, nuance, and a willingness to face tough questions.
This deep dive into On Call has been fascinating. We've looked at the characters, the themes, and the layers of meaning in this fictional world.
And it's made us think about those real-world issues, hasn't it? The writers have given us a lot to chew on, and I hope our deep dive has gotten you all thinking and maybe even inspired you to check out the show when it comes out.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.